up. That, of course, being the story from the original games where the dead Marowak who was killed by Team Rocket becomes the ghost of the Pokemon Tower, leaving behind its child Cubone crying in the hands of Mr. Fuji. Now that'll bring a tear to even the most rugged trainer. Anyway, all is not sad, however, because Marowak eventually got a Alolan form, which is a ghost fire type, presumably based off of the original Ghost Marowak. While this sounds like a terrific backstory for an anime or a fantasy character, we're more interested in Marowak's competitive capabilities. So, how good was Marowak actually? And in this video, we'll be covering these competitive formats. Now in Gen 1, Marowak is sadly terrible in the unforgiving Gen 1 metagame. There isn't even anything it can do as a gimmick. It is unfortunately 100% outclassed by Sandslash in every way. It has weaker stats in everything except for defense, which is his one good stat and is equal to Sandslash, but since Sandslash has higher HP, Sandslash is bulkier in this regard. Marowak also lacks Swords Dance and coverage from Rock Slide, and although for some reason it can learn Blizzard and Fire Blast, that doesn't mean much coming from Marowak's horrendous special, which means it also folds to every Psychic and Blizzard running around in conjunction with its poor HP. It very often loses to every single Pokemon on the opposing team, outside of the occasional Jolteon, who can simply switch to anything else to deal with Marowak. There are much more better ground types to use, with even Sandslash being a worthwhile pseudo gimmick. So in the RBY metagame, Marowak is completely outclassed, but it's at least a decent pick for underuse. But that's okay because GSC Marowak is one of the most unique Pokemon to ever exist. The addition of held items in Gen 2, which allows it to pack well over a 500 attack stat unboosted. Nothing else in the metagame comes close to that. And with that attack stat, that means by using a single Swords Dance, it reaches 999 attack. The only other Pokemon who are capable of this are Belly Drummers, who of course lose half of their health. In this regard, nothing else does what Marowak does. As a matter of fact, because of the way Gen 2 mechanics work, Swords Dance variants must make sure their attack DVs are from 15 to 13, because after the Swords Dance boost, they will roll over the 999 cap, thus having an attack stat of 5 or so, and as a result will do absolutely nothing. This also means that Marowak should not use Swords Dance twice. Marowak's origin started with the now classic combination of Joltwhack, where Jolteon would try to pass agility to it, Marowak would Swords Dance, and the game could potentially be over right then and there, as everything in theory folded to an Earthquake, Rock Slide, or Hidden Power bug. Swords Dance was also fantastic because it meant it couldn't be stalled by Growl, and it has 16 more PP than Charm, meaning it was a real thorn to defensive teams. While Joltwhack wasn't a bad strategy per se, it didn't exactly leave Marowak branded as a solid overall Pokemon, since it was now just that thing that could try to auto-win alongside Jolteon, but that was nowhere near a consistent strategy. Not only can Jolteon's passing be disrupted by common roars like Raikou and Steelix, Marowak also can't always receive the pass and then safely set up. In addition to this, there are also many common Pokemon that can withstand a 999 assault from Marowak. Skarmory can even take 2 of them, while Cloyster, Fortress, Suicune, Heracross, Snorlax, Miltank, and Umbreon have a chance to survive as well. Of course, there's still a chance for the strategy to work if you get a flinch from Rock Slide, which is a 27% chance when factoring accuracy, but it wasn't a consistent performer, and thus for a time Marowak was not yet viewed as a top tier contender. But despite being a seemingly one-trick offensive pony, Marowak also has defensive utility. Pure ground typing is excellent in this gen, and thus gives it great matchups against common Pokemon like Raikou, Tyranitar, Steelix, and Rhydon. Its typing also allows it to resist Rock Slide and not be weak to Earthquake, which is fantastic, and allows it to dish out a lot of damage to those using Quake Slide. Being immune to Thunder when it's one of the most common moves ever is also an incredible value. The question is though, how do you make use of these defensive attributes when Marowak is still slow, not that bulky, and most notably, barring the occasional Thief Pokemon, is the only Pokemon in the tier that does not prefer leftovers? Well, it turns out Marowak thrives and fits like a glove with 2 pieces of support that are huge facets of GSC: Paralysis and Stall Teams. Paralysis is fairly self-explanatory, but how are Stall Teams supposed to make use of Marowak? Well, it turns out that they are capable of supporting each other dearly. With Rest in the 4th slot, Marowak can make up for its lack of recovery, and the Stall Team's accompanying Heal Bell will wake it right up for another assault. These teams also almost always carry Rapid Spin to make up for Marowak's more severe than most Spike's weakness. Defensively, Marowak isn't going to be switching in a lot in order to wall things, but he provides provides some very neat tricks. Being immune to Thunder can help a stall team play around a vicious electric type, spamming it to try and snag key paralysis on the walls. Nothing scares out an opposing Raikou harder than Marowak, the only Pokemon in Overuse that can one-hit KO it outside of Explosion or Self-Destruct, and this can help when Raikou is chaining together roars like nobody's business. Marowak can provide an offensive way to threaten Snorlax when he's trying to zero in on the walls that can't hurt him, and as he's withering them away, suddenly he's face to face with Marowak. Now Snorlax is the one whose team is on the defensive against the threat. Indeed, this offensive capability is something many stall teams appreciate, and as hard as it may be to believe, stall teams don't dish out a lot of damage, and that can be exploited in many ways. Many of them rely solely on Snorlax, and while Snorlax is amazing of course, he also rarely will blow through an entire team uninhibited. Marowak gives him much needed support. Belly Drum Snorlax and Swords Dance Marowak is an insane amount of offense that's incredibly tough to wall, and stall teams of course make up for their offensive shortcomings with their excellent sturdy backbone. The 1-2 punch of Lax and Marowak will gang up on the opposing Skarmory, forcing a rest so that the other can go to town. Alternatively, Snorlax paralyzing stuff is also often just as good, if not better. Though Rest Marowak actually gains a relatively hard wall in Exeggutor, but many stall teams can fit in Pursuit Umbreon or Tyranitar, and alternatively, they can try to wall it unless it explodes. Plus, even a grass type like Exeggutor doesn't enjoy taking too many Earthquakes or Rock Slides, which do equal damage. Overall, the point is, several of the most iconic GSC teams run Marowak to great effect, including one of the most well-known stall teams with Snorlax, Marowak, Starmie, Miltank, Skarmory, and Zapdos or Raikou, but it can definitely fit on many more. Now Marowak has some other options. Hidden Power Flying cuts into its bulk, but it can potentially catch Heracross, who has a tendency to be obnoxious for it. Fire Blast deals with Skarmory unboosted and can also surprise Fortress, which is usually not an awful interim measure. It even hits the rare Meganium that's usually a pretty good check, and Body Slam spreads its own paralysis. It's usable as both the 4th move on Swords Dance sets and on 4 attack variants. They can often be mix and match into sets, but it's worth mentioning that 4 attack Marowak is great because it doesn't really give up on any wall since it hits so hard. Unlike, for example, Machamp, who becomes totally helpless against Suicune and even Vaporeon. And spreading its own paralysis is also huge, and it probably won't end up sweeping, but it'll certainly tear a nasty hole. Not running Swords Dance also means it can utilize its maximum attack DV, which bumps its attack up a few percent, but in some situations that can be key. Basically, Marowak's offense can be utilized however the player wants to. An early game wall breaker that can trade for something tough to break, a hit and runner that's unparalleled with the rest of the metagame, or an endgame sweeper. GSC Marowak is truly unique, and its special presence is part of what defines the beauty of the Overuse metagame. In the 3rd generation, Marowak was not anywhere near a star player. However, he wasn't bad at all. Throughout the generation, he had a small niche alongside Agility and Baton Pass Zapdos to rid him of one of his major issues, which is speed. While Marowak is still unable to outpace Aerodactyl and Jolteon after an agility boost, he was not immediately threatened by them. And with a set of Swords Dance, Earthquake, Rock Slide, and Hidden Power Bug, Marowak was capable of crushing entire teams with levels of power most weren't prepared for. It could even use one of its signature moves, Bone Meringue, to deal with substitute variants of Tyranitar and Raikou. Accuracy notwithstanding, while not giving up any of Earthquake's power. Of course, this was not a consistently winning strategy used often by top tier players, and thus Marowak would be something you were more surprised to see than not. But it did exist. As a matter of fact, both Suicune made a habit of always running 8 speed EVs just to always outrun Jolly Marowak. Recently, certain players have taken a hit from GSC and tried to use Marowak on more traditional offensive teams. After all, it does have some excellent attributes. It's immune to sand, it isn't paper thin, it's immune to electric, it resists rock. Those are some tremendous attributes to have on a Pokemon in this meta. Of course, its low special bulk and speed were a problem, but that was fixed with the GSC style paralysis speed, with tremendous offensive Pokemon such as Zapdos, Snorlax, and Jirachi easily dishing it out. Thus, Marowak is a new and unique member of the quote-unquote real advanced metagame, as opposed to a Ninjask level gimmick. It's a real bruiser that can help your team out in a pinch defensively too. Checking Tyranitar is never a bad thing, and it tends to run Jolly now in order to outrun Milotic, Agility, Metagross, and many Dragon Dance Tyranitar. And although Celebi has natural cure for paralysis and even speedless defensive variants will outspeed Marowak, Celebi must always be careful of a Hidden Power Bug on Switch. The quintessential physical wall of this generation, Swampert, is absolutely destroyed by a +2 stab Thick Club Earthquake. Even the most physically bulky variants possible have a very